The Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was written by a bunch of hypocrites that went on, and they wrote about freedom and democracy while also being slave owners. They are despicable. They are not heroes. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, was largely drafted by James Madison. Remember I was telling you about the dudes that, owned slaves and wrote a document about freedom? The Constitution and the Bill of Rights is one of the most hypocritical pieces of paper I've ever read in my life. They wrote these amendments in 1789. During this time, slavery was still legal. It was deeply entrenched in the American economy and society. It wasn't until the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, followed by the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865, that freed the enslaved black people. While the Bill of Rights guarantees fundamental protections for all U.S. citizens, its enforcement has historically been uneven, especially for black folk. In practice, many black people have faced systemic discrimination that undermines the full application of their rights, particularly within the justice system, law enforcement, and social structures. This unequal enforcement reflects broader patterns of racism and exclusion that have persisted since the nation's founding. Here's a breakdown of how key aspects of the Bill of Rights have not been fully enforced for the population of black folk. Freedom of speech and petition. Black activists and leaders have long used the First Amendment rights to speak out against injustice, particularly during the Civil Rights Movement. However, laws and government actions have often sought to suppress this speech, as seen in the FBI's CONTELPRO program, which targeted civil rights organizations like the Black Panther Party. Activists like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X faced surveillance, harassment, and even assassination for speaking out on behalf of black rights. Freedom of the press. Historically, African American publications such as the Chicago Defender and The Crisis played crucial roles in advocating for black rights, yet they face legal and extrajudicial suppression. In more recent years, black journalists and social media activists face harassment and even violence when challenging the status quo. But ask me if I'm scared. The right to keep and bear arms. Black people have historically been denied the full exercise of their Second Amendment rights. For example, after the Black Panther Party armed themselves in protest of police brutality in the 1960s, there was a nationwide push to restrict black people's access to firearms. This led to gun control acts that disproportionately affected black Americans, such as the Mulford Act in 1967 in California, aimed specifically at disarming the Black Panther Party, brought on by Reagan. Okay, he was so scared of the Black Panther Party that for the first time, the NRA was even behind gun legislation, as long as it was specifically about taking weapons away from black men. The Fourth Amendment, protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. The practice of stop and frisk disproportionately affects black people, even though it violates the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches. In many major cities like New York, black communities are more likely to be stopped by the police, often without a warrant or probable cause. Examples would be the George Floyd case or the Breonna Taylor case, which illustrate how black Americans face a stark reality where their right to be secure in their person is not honored. A police often uses excessive force against black individuals with impunity. The Fifth Amendment, rights in criminal cases. Black people face disproportionate incarceration and harsh criminal penalties. According to the NAACP, black people are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of white Americans, and they are more likely to be wrongfully convicted. Many black defendants are denied adequate legal representation due to financial barriers or the lack of qualified public defenders. Cases like Kalief Browder, who was imprisoned for 3 years without a trial and eventually passed away by unaliving himself. Black people are often deprived of their due process. Let's talk about involuntary confessions and coercion. There is a long-standing history of black people being coerced into self-incrimination through police intimidation and false confessions, violating the Fifth Amendment's protections. The Sixth Amendment, the right to a fair trial with an impartial jury. Black Americans are frequently denied an impartial jury. The criminal justice system has a history of excluding black jurors from jury pools, particularly in high-profile cases involving black defendants. For example, in the case of Trayvon Martin, the jury did not include any black jurors, leading to concerns about fairness and racial bias in the trial process. Unequal sentencing. Black defendants often face harsher sentencing than white defendants for similar crimes. Studies have shown that more black men are more likely to receive the death penalty or long prison sentences than their white counterparts, even for similar offenses. The Eighth Amendment, protection from cruel and unusual punishment. Black people are disproportionately affected by mass incarceration and often experience inhumane conditions within the prison system. Prisons are often overcrowded, underfunded, and fail to provide adequate medical or mental health care, violating the Eighth Amendment. The disproportionate sentencing of black people to life sentences or death sentences for nonviolent offenses also points to the cruel and unusual punishment that has historically and presently affected black Americans. The Ninth and 10th Amendments. These amendments affirm that rights exist beyond those enumerated in the Constitution. However, the application of rights to black Americans have been limited by state governments through Jim Crow laws and voter suppression tactics, poll taxes, literacy tests, and voter ID laws that have hindered their ability to exercise basic political rights. While the Voting Rights Act of 1965 aimed to prevent racial discrimination in voting, voter suppression persists in various forms. For example, efforts to purge voter rolls disproportionately affect black Americans. Gerrymandering practices dilute black political power. Systematic inequality beyond the Bill of Rights, racism in the law enforcement and the justice system. The application of laws is not applied equally across races. Black Americans are more likely to be arrested, charged, convicted, and sentenced more harshly than white individuals for similar offenses. This is a fact. This is known as a radical disparity in the criminal justice system. But nobody cares about black people. The economic disadvantages. Economic inequality among black Americans also impacts their ability to access justice. Wealthier individuals can afford better legal representation, while poorer black individuals are often forced to rely on overburdened public defenders who may not have time or the resources to mount an effective defense. They barely even get to know your name. In conclusion, the Bill of Rights, in theory, guarantees protections for all citizens, but in practice, racial discrimination has led to unequal enforcement for black Americans. While legal victories and societal change have been made, such as the Civil Rights Movement and landmark Supreme Court decisions, much remains to be done to ensure that black Americans are truly treated equally under the law. Addressing systemic racism, reimagining law enforcement practices, and ensuring fair and equal access to courts and crucial steps toward realizing promises made in the Bill of Rights for all its citizens. I hope you were picking up what I was putting down in this video today. I love you, black man. I love you, black woman. Knowledge is power. Power to the people.